Hello and welcome to the video. This is a quick video to answer this question here from this gentleman called MeFixEngines. It's a fantastic question. It's one of those things that might not be talked about an awful lot. This is kind of an old school question. And what I mean by that is that in the modern hobby we have lots of things like telemetry radios that will send flight battery information down to your radio so you can see it and set up alerts, or you have it displayed in your on-screen display so it's down in the corner. And as you're flying around, you can see exactly how much battery voltage you have left, and you can figure out how long you had to fly. But what about for those situations where you're flying a model where you don't have that telemetry system, where you're not flying FPV and you don't have that on-screen display? How do you figure it out? And actually, there's 3 different common ways that people use. So let me cover those for those of you that might not have bumped into this stuff. Let's cover a couple of LiPo battery basics before we get too far into this, because we're going to use this to kind of figure out how long we can fly with these models. First and foremost is the fact that in any LiPo cell, so for example this is a 4S2200 battery, I use these a lot. These are the Gensace endurance batteries, but it's the same for all LiPo batteries. A fully charged cell, and there's 4 other cells inside this 4S battery, a fully charged cell is 4.2 volts. Consider the battery empty about 3.5 or 3.6 volts. So there's only 0.6 volts between the battery cell being fully charged and it being considered empty. Now you can fly batteries below 3.5 volts, but very quickly you get into a situation where the battery is going to start to be physically damaged and the performance will suffer. Some pilots don't care about that. Some pilots, me included, like to look after our batteries so it gives us hundreds of flights before we start to feel it getting old and tired. The other thing to think about here is the capacity that's shown on this thing, 2200. That's not completely usable. You're going to use about 80% of that capacity. So in that case, if you multiply 2200 by 80%, you get 1760 milliamps. That's the maximum milliamp hours that we should be pulling from the pack safely. And that discharge voltage and that milliamp hours, if you use either of those methods, you should get to the same answer. So now we've done that quick recap on LiPo batteries, I'll put a link down below to a couple of my videos that talk in a lot more detail about LiPo battery basics. Now we know that, how do you use that information to figure out how long you can fly in a particular pack? Well, the trick is to go to the field and have a relatively short flight. I like to fly for 5 or 6 minutes and to fly in a normal style. That way it gives me a representative idea of how much battery is going to be used. And then I'll land the model and then unplug the battery. And once I've unplugged it, I can then use one of the following 3 methods to figure out how long the flight can actually be on that particular model with that particular battery. The first way to do it, and the way that I tend to use a lot, I tend to have a LiPo checker with me. This is an old Hobby King one, but when I plug the battery in, it will show me exactly how much of the capacity is left. So if I have been flying a little bit of time, and for example it says that there's 80% of the battery used after that 5-minute flight, I know that I've used 20%. So we can divide the 80% that's available in the battery, because again we don't want to take any more than that because potentially we might damage the battery and shorten its life. If we divide the 80% capacity that's available by the 20%, for example, that we've used, and multiply it by the flight time, let's assume the flight time was 5 minutes, then that means that I can figure out that 20-minute flight time is about as long as I'm going to get on this particular battery. And this is the way that I tend to do it the most. After a test flight, I'll come back in, I'll plug the battery in, read off that percentage value, and then set a timer on my radio for about that time, maybe a minute or 2 less, just for extra safety, because occasionally you might fly it more aggressively than you have on the test flight, and that will mean use a little bit more power. The second way that we can figure it out is if you don't have one of those fancy LiPo checkers, you can just use the voltage of the battery. Now you can either plug the battery into the charger and the charger will show you what the battery voltages and cell voltages are, or you can just use a simple voltmeter, pop it on the connector for the battery and read off the voltage and divide that by the number of cells. What you're looking for here is how much of that voltage has gone away, remembering that 4.2 volts is the voltage per cell when it's fully charged. So let's say, example, we get it back and we do that calculation and we see that it's actually at 4.0 volts per cell. That means that we've actually used 0.2 volts in our flight. So the available voltage between a fully charged and a discharged cell is 0.6 volts. So we can divide that 0.6 volts by the voltage drop that we've just seen, which is 0.2 volts, and again multiply it by the flight time. And that then in this case would mean that I could fly it for 15 minutes flight time in this particular example. The last way is a very easy way to do it as well. If you plugged in the battery and you forgot to take the measurement of the voltage before you hit the charge button on the battery charger, what you need to do with this one is just plug your battery in and recharge it, and the battery charger will show you how many milliamp hours are going back into the pack. Now we need to remember, of course, that we can't use all of the milliamp hours for safety. We only should be using 80% of them. So again, in that 2200 pack we looked at the beginning, I can only actually use 1760 milliamp hours safely. So say we let the battery charge back up, and when the battery charge is finished, we can see on the screen that it's put in 800 milliamp hours to recharge the battery back to fully charged. So we know that that's how much we've used. So then all we need to do is divide the 1760 milliamp hours that's available in that pack by the 800 milliamp hours, and again multiply it by whatever flight time we used in our little test flight. In this particular example, it works out about 11 minutes. So using any three of those methods, it's a pretty good way to figure out how long that particular battery is going to last in that model. Again, it really relates to flying style. If you're very gentle in your maiden flight, and then the next time you go out and you cane the model using lots of high throttle, the battery's going to last a lot less. Also remember that in cold weather, batteries will not perform as well. So if you're doing this test in the winter and it works out at, 10 minutes flight time, you might get 12 minutes out of that battery in summer. So it might be worthwhile rechecking it. Similarly, if you've flown the model a lot in summertime and then you start flying it in really cold weather, I would take about 20% off of whatever time you figured out and use that for the timer on the radio. Remember that you can push packs lower than the limits that I talked about in this video. I see pilots regularly going down to 3.5 volts and below and using more of those packs. And although that's absolutely something you can do, personally I don't do it. It dramatically shortens the life of the battery, and I like my batteries to last a long time. And the last tip is when I tend to put the timer on the radio, I will set the timer up with the THS setting that automatically starts the timer as soon as you increase the throttle. It's a great way to make sure that you don't accidentally forget to start the timer, which I used to do an awful lot back in the day. As soon as you raise the throttle, the timer's running, and when the timer runs out, you know it's time to come home. Always err on the side of caution when you're figuring this stuff out. I would rather fly with a little bit left in the tank when I land and kind of fine tune it. Don't go mad. If you go mad, you're just going to shorten the life of your battery, and in worst cases have the model misbehave, maybe even brown out, maybe even lose control if you push the battery too far. But hopefully for me, Fix Engines, that's the way to do it. Just fly the model, figure out how much of the battery has been used and compare that to how much is available, and then multiply it by your flight time, and it'll give you a very good idea of how long that battery is going to last. Thank you for spending your time today watching that video. You can find me in all the usual places on social media, and if you're trying to learn about a subject, then check out the playlist. All of my videos are organised into easy to follow playlists that, if you're trying to learn a topic, will take you from the basics right the way through to some pretty advanced stuff.